going to make 12 crumpets using the recipe from Warburton's. What I've done is I'm going to double it up from the recipe that you probably find online, because this will make 12 crumpets, hopefully. And that I think is a nice number to make because they freeze extremely well. First thing I want to talk about is flour. I've made these crumpets quite a few times and they worked perfectly. And then one day they just collapsed. They were flat. There were bubbles when they went onto the pan, but the bubbles disappeared almost instantly and you were left with a pancake. They were horrible. And I did it a second time and they were still horrible. And then I did it a third time thinking, I think I know what the problem is. They were still wrong. Then I changed the flour and they worked perfectly. The problem I had was, I think, was using a flour with too little protein, so there's not enough gluten in there. This one here is a perfectly good flour for most purposes, great for doing biscuits, but the protein level is only 9.4 grams, and that's actually quite low for a plain flour. I tried this one, the Dutchy one, and this one has 11.3, and that's reasonably high. I've tried others like Marriage's flour, which is about 10, and that works perfectly. But I don't know what the level at what it stops working is, but 9.4 is too low. Okay, so in traditional fashion, I've got everything weighed out here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, I've got yeast, and I'm going to be mixing that with a little water. I've measured out the 400 mils of warm water, and I'm going to take 2 tablespoons out and mix that in with the yeast. I think the recipe requires the water to flour ratio to be fairly accurate, because if it's too wet it's going to collapse. If it's too thick it won't rise up enough. And what we want to do is have the crumpets rise up and set with all the bubbles in place. And as we'll come on to later, one of the important things is making sure that the top actually sets before you try and colour the top. I like to colour the top of them just to make it look a bit prettier. But if you do that, you do have to make sure that it's set, otherwise you end up with a layer of it's being smeared. So I'm using, as I said, the Dutchy original flour here. This is the yeast which I love. I've got loads of this. It works perfectly well. I love this instant yeast. And just using Waitrose baking powder. Okay, and ordinary table salt. Right, on with the mixing. Okay, I'm going to start here with the yeast. And what I'm going to do now is take my water, 400 mils, let's say, take a couple of tablespoons out and put that in with the yeast. Quick whisk. Do this until it's nice and smooth. I always think it's really good if you've got it properly mixed beforehand, because then when we add this to the mixture, and you'll see it's only going to be there for 30 seconds, you can be sure that the yeast is properly dispersed. If I haven't got all the lumps out, then I think there's a risk. I think there's a risk of it being inconsistent, because you'll see once we've done this 30 seconds stirring, we don't touch the batter again after that. Okay. See, no lumps. Okay, next, flour. Water. It's the rest of the water there. Salt, half a teaspoon. This is just ordinary table salt. Half a teaspoon, approximately. Right, and now we mix this for 2 minutes. So, see you when we finish this. And there we are. Nice, smooth batter. No lumps. Because again, we're not going to get a chance to do anything with this. Now, recipe at this point, add yeast mixture, sugar and baking powder. I've got sugar and baking powder already weighed out here. Dry ingredients, put those in there. And now the yeast mixture. And now we're going to mix this for 30 seconds. Or thereabouts. And that's it. We've done the making of the batter. What I'm going to do now is take shower hat, put it over the top, and leave this to one side for about half an hour. Or 15 minutes to half an hour, they say in the recipe. I always think 15 minutes is a little too short. I have left this before now for much longer than half an hour because I forgot about it. In fact, the very last set of crumpets I made were like that. It is usable, but you have to be very careful because they froth up such a lot. And you'll see later on, spooning out the mixture is one of the trickiest things as far as I'm concerned. Right, back in half an hour. And our half hour is up, and let's have a look and see what we've got. We can see, if I lift the camera, plenty of bubbles there. Not too much of a smell, not too much yeasty smell. We've got bubbles there and bubbles on the side. I've got some butter melting here. I've got half a dozen rings, silicone brush, and I don't do these in a frying pan. I'm lucky I've got this flat griddle of plancha that I'm heating up here. The advantage of this for me is the centre is where the heat is being applied. So this is hotter than the outside. So what I'm going to do is start each of the crumpets off in the centre until the bottom has set, and then gently slide them to the edges. That mimics the effect of putting it in a pan and turning the heat down. I've got here a tray with some J-cloth on, because when the crumpets come off of the griddle, they're still warm, they're still moist. So to avoid them getting all damp, putting on the J-cloth, that will absorb some of the moisture. I've got, my method of spooning this out is to use a 1/3 of a cup measure, 80 mils. I find that when you're pouring it out, you can't measure it exactly because it's full of gas. So it's pointless trying to do it by weight, and an exact measurement is very difficult. I use this, fill it up, pour it out, and hope I've got most of it out. That way I usually end up between 11 and 12 crumpets. I'm going to try and get 12. If they're too thick, as I said earlier, if they're too thick, the top won't set properly. If they're too thin, they won't be very impressive. But in some ways, it's almost better to have them too thin than too thick. One of the issues is always about making sure that the inside of these are buttered properly, make sure that stuff doesn't stick, and almost always, and you know what will happen today, it'll go wrong, but almost always it should be that when these have cooked, they will shrink enough away from the side of the ring that they should just drop out. Okay, but I'm going to make at least one go wrong today just to show you how it works. Yeah. Okay, so my butter's nearly melted. This has been heating for a while. Because of the nature of this tray, it retains heat quite well. So I started off on a reasonably high heat, and then once the crumpets start to cook, I'll turn it down. We will end up with a bit of smoke coming off of the butter. Try not to use too much for that. Okay, we're ready to go. And my butter's nicely melted now. What I'm going to do is just do a little sizzle test. I've got the silicone brush and just put a little bit of this. Yes, that looks quite nice. That's sizzled. I put a little butter on the bottom there. It's nice to have some over this ready. Okay, first ring. So I'm just buttering the inside all the way around. Yeah. Place that down, second one, and there's the second one. Okay, moment of truth. Here we go. Fill up the measure, carefully to scoop it in, scrape off. There we go. And again, I don't know if you can see, but this batter is really quite bubbly. Okay. There, can you see bubbles on the surface? And this process takes a little while. The first one seems to take ages because you've got to wait for that to set. And what I'm going to do now is with the tongs, just gently slide that to the back. Obviously, you want to make sure that the batter has set in the bottom of the first rings before you move them, otherwise you end up with just it smearing, which is not very clever. Second ring, second set of rings, doing that. And I can hear sizzle as the excess butter drops to the bottom. Here we go again. 80ml scraped off, like that. There's still some left in there because you don't need a whole 80 mils. But what I don't want to do is use something like a 65ml container and have to get every last scrap out every time, because that's pretty tedious. Bubbles on the second, and if you can see, I tried to put about the same amount of mixture in both, and if I have done, you can see how much the first lot have risen since they went in, and with any luck you can see that they're starting to shrink away from the edge. And what I will be using a little later, secret weapon, cocktail stick. What I found is that not all of the holes will actually naturally form. That you get gas coming up, a very thin layer of batter over the top, and if you're lucky, that will just burst right at the right point, leaving you a hole for all that lovely butter later. But if they don't burst at the right point, you can actually encourage them. If you do it too soon, you will find that you'll burst the bubble and then batter will just rush in to fill the gap, and that's no help at all. So doing it late on is the best way. Trying to leave all this lot as long as possible. It's patience, I think, with this is the answer. Here we go with the third set of rings. I don't know if you can see, there's a difference. The ones at the back seem to be darker, and then these are brighter because these are the freshest ones. That's already changing nature. The edges are setting here. Can you see that? Now the edge set. The middle is still quite light. You can see it's liquid. And now I'm going to turn this down half a notch, they've been going long enough. I'm going to see if I can do this. Let's see, here's a bubble that could be, did you see? If I encourage it, you end up with a hole. If I do it too soon, it ends up with batter filling the gap and you've actually made it worse. I think this is not absolutely essential, but it does maximize the number of holes you get, and after all, that's part of what you're looking for. Now, this first one is looking to me like it's done reasonably well. I find that this is a bit like doing pancakes. The first one never works as well as all the others. If I lift this up, it's not coming out yet. They should just drop out. Occasionally they will stick slightly, and sometimes they will. Some of them will surprise you and be ready earlier, but it should be that the edges will all dry out and the ring should just come off. I like to take the ring off reasonably soon, not too soon because you do get reflected heat from the sides of the ring, but if I leave it till the last second, there's a risk that they're not cold enough for me to pick up to butter again to use the second time. There we go. I had a little bit of shaking. I don't know if you can get non-stick versions of these. Now that one, a slight bit of, it's just catching just on that corner. It's a round one, you idiot. I can see that sticking slightly. What I do with these, I know the ones you buy in the supermarket haven't got this, but when it's very nearly set like that, what I like to do is pick up the crumpet, take a small dollop of the butter, put that back on, and then gently lay the crumpet down on there, and you will end up with a little bit of browning on the surface. That's quite nice because it looks quite nice when you've done that. One of the things to bear in mind whenever you're handling these is that the structure of the dough hasn't necessarily set all the way through. So when you pick them up, they can be very delicate. Now this one has sucked slightly on one corner, so for the sake of speed, I'm just going to encourage it. And if you do that, there is a danger that you'll end up with something like this, a little tear. So if you can be more patient than I am, that'll be quite good. This crumpet has now got a lovely bit of colour. I think they look very good when you're offering them up to guests, I think, with the colour already on them. Here we go, pick this one up. You can see that's set just about, turn that over gently. That's dried out now. I'll try and move these two from the centre whilst I do other stuff. That allows me time then to take the first couple of rings that came out and refill them. These are nearly done here. This one. See, not quite done, but very nearly. Enough so it's no longer shiny. I think that's a criterion. If it's shiny, it's still very liquid. The one I have at the back here, and if you can see, that's still got some shiny bits, and it's quite warm. That one looks to me like it's done. Sizzle. That one's done. Again, remember the centre of my area is hotter than the outsides, so it's the same as putting it in a pan and turning it down. But it means I can, by doing it this way, I can do it continuously. If I use a pan, I have to heat it up, following the recipe, do one set and then let it cool down whilst I'm doing that, then take them off. So again, all in all, take a lot longer. And sometimes I find it, maybe it's where I've poured the batter, if I've caught the side of the ring, you end up with a little bit sticking there. That was stuck by this tiny, tiny piece here. That's all. So it's a matter of of common sense between saying, well, no, they will come out regardless, in which case you might end up with some burnt on the bottom, or hacking at them with a knife to try and get them out. And believe me, anything you do, see that's a little dark on the bottom, it'll still taste fine. Anything you do to attack the crumpet whilst it's still cooking will result in a dent, because they are the structure is very fragile. That one's done. And if you look at the sides, can you see holes in the sides? Very fluffy. I'll just put a dollop in there. Now here we go. This should be the batter for two. I've got this right. It's one. In this case, we actually have a little bit more left over. Anything left over, you could turn into, and I'm going to do this afterwards when I've done this, turn them into a little pikelet. Because realistically, a pikelet isn't much different from a crumpet, other than it's not held in with a ring. And I consider that chef's perks. Now, these crumpets are much better the next day. It gives the structure chance to firm up properly. And of course, if you do them in the afternoon, they're brilliant, ready for breakfast the next day. They'll keep quite nicely overnight in a sealed container. And if you have any left over after that, you can wrap them and freeze them. They freeze brilliantly. You can toast them. I wouldn't toast them from frozen. I find them much better if you let them defrost, come up to room temperature, and then toast from there. If you try and toast from frozen, I think there is always the danger of the centre still being cold. minutes on that one. These at the front here are still got shiny tops, so they're not ready, but I am doing some bubble popping. Again, see, it's trying to find the time to do the pop. If you leave it too late, there is a danger that they'll set and you won't be able to tell where the hole was. And I don't think you should go around attacking the top of it with a cocktail stick, and it's not a drizzle cake after all. These here nearly done, bubbling away. And we've been going here 20 minutes since I started this. It gives you an idea of how long this all takes. And don't forget, I am doing 2 lots here, but I think it doesn't take twice as long to make the mixture. And whilst you've got everything set up, why not do a second lot? A dozen is not a ridiculous amount to put in the freezer. So if you turn them over too soon and cook them, they look weird because you end up with the top layer smeared, and it looks like you've done you've put something on like a cracker or something. It doesn't work. They still taste delicious, of course, but you won't get the same amount of butter in them. Okay, these are ready to turn over. Take that one. Gently does it. Again, it's gently because this top layer is not quite set yet, of course. That's what we're doing here. And if I push it, it will smear again. Okay. Now, colour, that's all we want on there. A little bit of colour, because I think that these days when we don't have open fires and toasting forks, I think it's nice because I think if we're putting them in an electric toaster, they don't look as nice as they used to with an open fire. So I think a little bit of colour on them in advance does make them look a bit more attractive. Oh, that gives me a chance to do my pie clip. Okay, and get all of the batter, all the bits that fell off. A gap around the side, lift it off just like that, and that one. I would say never try and eat these as soon as they're done because they'll be too soft. The structure won't have a chance to set. Again, I'm just waiting for the shine to go. I have turned the heat down a fraction. So these are dark, they're not burnt. That's not black, that is dark brown. There we go. You see, these are going a bit darker because this holds its heat so much. I should have turned it down earlier to give it a chance to cool down. And there you have it. 1 dozen delicious crumpets, full of holes. Absolutely lovely. And there, that was the very last one. You see how it's got a bit squashed because I was impatient. You've lost some of the structure there because it was wet when it was cooked. So there you go. I was right. Don't be impatient. I think I'll have that one.